So I took one of the German prisoners and we went over to look, and sure enough, it was a big generator. But there, beside the generator, was a stairway going down into the headquarters. I decided, it wasn't bravery, I don't know what made me do it, I decided to go down. And for some reason or other, I decided to take off my tin helmet and put on my green beret, my regimental green beret. In order to do that, I had to take my pistol and put it in the back of my camouflage jacket. So when I got down to the bottom, there was a German with a machine gun pointing at me. Now, if I had a pistol in my hand, I'm sure I would have been shot. But here I was, not even a hard hat, I had this green bonnet on. I asked for someone to speak English, and a Hauptmann, that's a captain, came forward. And I told him that they were to surrender. He brought me over to the commanding officer. I told the general that if they didn't surrender within about 12 minutes, if I hadn't reported back, that shelling was going to start up again. He said enough of his men had been killed and gave the order to surrender. There were about 4,000 altogether. I did not capture them all through the front. 4,000 gave up. That was the last fight we had in Holland.
For his initiative and bravery, Paul of Prairie was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, a military medal of honor and distinction. As the German forces were disarmed and headed into captivity, those of us on the front line greeted the news that the war at last was over with relief. In Holland, largely liberated by the Canadian Army, the celebration after 4 years of German occupation was spontaneous and unrestrained. The streets were filled with well-wishers, eager to thank us as their liberators. As the newly victorious soldiers of the Canadian Army in Europe, we were now battle-hardened veterans, men who had tested ourselves at the front line and endured. The experience, however brief, would profoundly influence us for the rest of our lives. At the time, most of us were eager to put it all behind us and take up new challenges. Now we had to adapt to a world we had not yet experienced, the world of peacetime. For the lucky ones, there was a quick transition.
It seemed like almost overnight. I was suddenly on the train pulling into Saskatoon, and then in a few days I was back in school with my homework not done. Yeah, and the funny part of it was that a friend of mine had written on one of my books, Stan Medland, first year agriculture for the next 4 years. And when I opened those books, that was the first one I took out, and it was exactly 4 years.
What's going to happen now? It's all over. We were almost civilians because most of us still had our army duds. We hadn't even got our allowance to buy civilian clothes. So the lecture halls were a real oddball mixture, I'll tell you, of every beret and tam that you could imagine. Some officers and some private soldiers and army boots, and anything went for that first year. Taking lectures, just the same professors, the same lecture halls that we had left only in the fall of '44.
I wanted a career. I did not have my matriculation. I couldn't go to university. I couldn't get a professional career. When I returned to high school, I did go back to, I went to St. Michael's with the kids. In fact, it was very interesting because in a couple of classes, students would come up and say, "Sir, can you help me with this?" They thought I was a teacher.
For others, the return to civilian life was slower.
I managed to get my head in the way of a bullet, but I was very lucky because although it laid me low at the time, it doesn't seem to have done too much lasting damage when I was able to survive.
Alan Earp received a serious head wound in Germany in the last month of the war.
I returned to Sioux. I went back after about a year of convalescence. I went back and finished at the University of Toronto, did 2 more years there, and then went on to spend the rest of my life in universities.
Ken Brimacombe was captured March 7th in the attack on Wien. As a prisoner of war, he suffered from starvation and sickness and needed several months to recover his health.
I wasn't there very long. I was in there, well, I was taking prisoner the 7th of March, and on the 18th of April, the German guards all fled. They left. And then we broke the gate down, and when the British troops came by, they threw their compo rations out on the road to us as they kept on going. And we dove into this food, these compo rations, and devoured those. And Yeah, I probably weighed about 140 pounds, 45 pounds maybe when I was in action there, and I must have dropped down to 85 or 90 pounds, I think, in that prison camp, because we didn't get enough to eat really, and so we got pretty hungry.
Don Pruner was wounded near the Küsten Canal in Germany, but rapidly recovered and entered college in September 1945.
A friend of mine said to me that it was an experience that he wouldn't have missed for the world, but he'd never want to do it again. And I recall that when I came home, one of my brothers who had not been overseas said to me that we should have stayed and taken on the Russians. And I said to him, if you want to take on the Russians, go on and do it. But I personally had, at that point, had my fill of the fighting.
I was in the Army 3 years, and I was home and discharged before I was 21. It's easy to have a sense of duty when you're in the Army because the Army gives you commands and said, do this, do that. It's probably harder today to have a sense of duty after the war where there's no urgency. If you want to have kids today with a sense of duty, that duty is to provide for a family or get yourself through school, and there's nobody there saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that. So it's a sense of duty, but it's a thing that we were proud to have done, and we would hope that the same prospect would be passed on.
The victory in 1945 marked the end of a time of sacrifice by soldiers and civilians that made possible a Canada that millions of us take for granted. Yet we should all remember that the freedom we have in Canada today came at a heavy cost in young lives. As young Canadians in 1945, we met the great challenges of our time, confident of our success. We are confident that the young Canadians of today will find that the values and strengths that brought us success in the past will enable you to deal with the challenges that you face today.